should ask ourselves, are we providing the right leadership?
Jobs are created by a growing economy. If an economy doesn't grow, there is no way you can create jobs.
I think now we have to come back to our renaissance. This is our time for African renaissance.
It is now time for innovative leadership in Africa.
Hello and welcome to State of Africa. I'm George Ndirango from the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute and your host for today's discussion. African nations are at a critical crossroads in their quest to achieve the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Now, despite notable progress in poverty reduction and access to education and clean water, different crises from COVID-19 to economic hardships have stalled momentum and threatened to leave our most vulnerable behind. That was the basis of conversations held at the recently concluded Africa Leadership Forum. Convened by Dr. Jakaya Kikwete, the former president of Tanzania, and the former prime minister of Ethiopia, Haile Mariam Desalegn, the convening explored in great detail innovative solutions and collaborative efforts necessary in making sure we have equitable development across the continent. Amongst different interventions from the speakers in attendance, the world listened in as Dr. Julie Gichuru moderated a powerful conversation with the heads of state and dignitaries. Let's take a look at this important conversation.
Allow me maybe to start with you, Dr. Koroma, Your Excellency. In order to decide where we are going and how we get there, Africa needs to work effectively. Now we have the African Union, started off as the OAU. It's achieved incredible things for Africa. And yet, there is something about the coming together of our nations that is a bit of a problem. We've been talking about the AFCFTA for years now. But this is simply about agreeing as countries that we're going to trade together. Our borders are not ours. Our communities cut across. Your Excellency, what must Africa do to truly be able to come together and resolve to speak, maybe not in one voice, but at least to commit and to work closely together? What are your thoughts on this? How do we become truly a team? Please, sir.
We are not lack of ideas, we are not lack of plans, and we have come a long way in the AU, from the OAU to AU. And the AU, as it is now, have a program of action. We also have the African Free Trade Area. And in all of this, we should ask ourselves, have we made the kind of progress that we have anticipated for 2030? Are we on track on our 2063 agenda? And I think we have to be frank and honest to ourselves that yes, we have made progress, but we are saddled with more challenges that we can imagine. So we have to look inwards. Are we providing the right leadership? To me, I believe that is key. Because in our individual states, we are confronted with our individual challenges. But we also have opportunities of meeting at our sub-regional levels. In West Africa, we have ECOWAS, the SADC, the North African groupings, and such opportunities for us to review what is happening. Challenges should be addressed at national level, also at the regional level and continental. But have we taken the right steps? At the AU level, we now have the African peer review mechanism. But is it really realizing what is expected of it? I think we have to look inwards. The answer is within ourselves. We have to be frank and brutally frank to ensure that the opportunities that are now created by the day, now we have heard about Africa First. If we don't grab this opportunity and assert ourselves and anchor ourselves to the African idea of moving forward. That is internalizing everything, resources. We should not be depending on the partners out to support us. We have so much within us that I think we have to take bold decisions and be openly frank to ourselves and look at the agendas we have set, maybe slight review here and there, because some of them are becoming obsolete. The African free trade in itself can take us out of the woods, but we have had it and nothing is happening. So I think we have to look inwards. The answer is within us. We have to be frank, we have to be bold, and move on to take advantage of the opportunities that are now making themselves available.
Thank you.
Africa First opportunity.
Thank you for that. And we look to you as our statesmen and elders to help drive that agenda and encourage our leaders to look inward. You know, if you think about it, Africa, and I'm thinking of the very interesting information shared by Mr. Chipeta. Africa is like a home, and the father and mother in this home, the father primarily, has been allowing somebody who's interested in what he has in his house to fund his home. And he's been going with it, and he's been allowing it for years at his own cost, right? Not seeing what he loses. Then all of a sudden, somebody says, I'm imposing tariffs, I'm switching off, or they think they're switching off the, they think they're switching off the funds. And this man in his home now has to look at his home and say, now I've got to figure it out. This is actually, might be the best opportunity for Africa. Your Excellency, Dr. Marzuki, let me come to you now on this. And just diving deeper before, and I will come back to ask you what some of the key issues and actionable points you think are. But before I do that, I want to talk about conflict and the fact that we are seeing more conflict on the continent. As much as some countries are moving forward incredibly, some are regressing. You know, the number of refugees and forcibly displaced persons on this continent is incredibly high. Where do we go? What do we need to do? Because to address all these things, we must have stability.
We have an agreement, an important agreement upon three major issues. The first issue is probably that we are going to face a more unstable world, more conflicts, and this probably would be the most important challenge for the development of Africa. The second issue is we will have in Africa less and less foreign aid. You have probably heard about the fate of the USAID. And even in Europe also we were going to have less and less aid. And this is probably good news and not bad news, because really we have to give up this old idea that foreign aids can help development Africa. I don't believe that. I do believe that we have to rely on ourselves. So I think there is a general agreement about the three issues, mainly the fact that we are going to face tough times because the instability would grow everywhere and not only in Africa. So how can we deal with all this dangerous situation? We all know what have to be done. We all know the technical measures that have to be done. But the problem is the political will. Do we have the political will, to undertake those important measures? I'm afraid to say no. It's up to us now to really to take the necessary measure, and this necessary measure for me are political. Once again, democratic government, non-corrupt government, independent from the West. Otherwise, I'm afraid that we will have always to face the same problems.
Wow, that's food for thought. Your Excellency, Dr. Kikwete, let me come to you. If you were to focus on 2 or 3 key areas, we were told to prioritize, focus, you can't do everything. If you were to focus on 2 or 3 key areas, what would they be? What do you feel are the most important things Africa needs to do right now?
You know, when I was foreign minister and president, when we meet, development partners, somebody will ask you, give me one priority. Yes. That bothers you the most. I would say, look here. I'll give you the list of my priorities and choose which one you are ready to support. Because health is a challenge. Africa bears the largest burden in terms of diseases. When you take malaria, for example, of the 11 top countries in the world that have the largest share of incidents and death from malaria, only one is not African, India. The remaining 10 are in Africa. Take HIV, AIDS, all these stunting and so on. So that's one. When you look at education, where I'm chairman of the Global Partnership for Education, there are 240 million young people, children and young people who are out of school. Out of those 240 million, 100 million are in Africa. When you look at, but those who are in schools, in primary school, 33% don't complete their education. Dropout rates are quite high. You're not talking of 3% or 2%, which is plus or minus. And those who complete their education, the learning outcomes are low. If we can prioritize economic growth as one of the major factors, because if you talk about jobs, jobs are created by a growing economy. If an economy doesn't grow, there is no way you can create jobs. You know, the simple analogy I always take, like the case of back home. People use containers. They get containers from abroad. After offloading the goods, then they make groceries out of it. They sell. At this place, when somebody has that container or a small shop or a small pub, there is someone who's going to be employed to get the beer from the brewery. There is somebody who will be sitting on the sides there, barbecuing. There is someone who is going to be employed opening the bottles. You have created jobs. That's one example. So if an economy grows, then you create jobs. But also, it all depends upon the structure of the economy, the focus. If you focus on infrastructure development, in fact of this. So I would really say that at the heart of it is economic growth. But one of the major catalysts of economic growth is education. Because in Africa, only 20% of kids have access to secondary school education. So we are essentially a continent of primary school leavers. Primary school education is literacy education. The education that empowers is beyond, that creates a middle class, is beyond secondary school. Only, of course, only recently that we have reached 10% can have access to tertiary education. In Japan, I was there recently, they're already talking of 80% now. The same with South Korea and all this. So I'm saying the situation in Africa in many of these indicators is difficult. We have made progress, but it's maybe 20%, but the part that is remaining is still vast, and we need to do more. Africa produces what they don't consume and consume what they don't produce. You produce cotton, you only sell the cotton in bales, they make a shirt, and then you buy a shirt from there. So the whole, how do we factor value addition as a major component, as a major factor? So even when we talk about growing the economy, there are so many other aspects. Look at infrastructure development, education, but also the whole of the financial sector. How do you develop the financial sector so that you'll be able to support the African economy that's growing? We are talking about the trade. We are talking about trade. We have regional economic groupings. But within the regional economic groupings, tariff and non-tariff barriers have simply become impossible to remove in perspective, because we're always talking about non-tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers, non-tariff barriers. So there is still a lot more that needs to be, as President Marzouk has factored it. Political will is also critical. Political will is also critical, is a major priority if we have within nations and between nations, within our regional economic groupings and at the continental level.
Your Excellency Desalegn, as I come to you, and I do know that there are plans for the African School of Governance, which has been announced, which has been launched, and the idea is, how do we build a cadre of absolutely exceptional young Africans who go into public service, go into other spaces of leadership? But there are many other ways that we can address this issue of political will. There are maybe pressures, or are there incentives? Let's try and solve this little problem that we have here. How would you go about addressing, ensuring that we can build interest, understanding, and will of leadership, and of upcoming leadership, advisors, support teams within governments, etc.? Is there a way Africa can now take more control, please?
My little readings show that the history of development of continents, like in Asia or even in Europe and Americans, there was a time when development begins as a turning point. So that tipping point, to me, I think has come to Africa at this moment. So currently, when you see the geopolitics and the political economy globally, I think this is a moment where Africa has to grab this opportunity, and we shouldn't miss it at this moment. So I believe these countries has started from this tipping point when they came at a point where there is existential threat. And to us now, because of the challenge we see, like the climate change and the global, economic politics that's going on currently, we see that this is a tipping point for us, and it's an existential as well. We have huge use bulge, and maybe the coming 5 years or so, many African countries will be in turmoil if we don't grab this opportunity and bring our young people into jobs. So what calls for is the mindset. I think this mindset change is much more important. Why all these conferences, seminars, all those things, if we don't change our mindset? If we don't do that, I think it's a futile exercise, and we have to do that. I believe this conference itself can contribute somehow to this kind of mindset. We need mindset change, not from grassroots, first from our top leadership. We have to be somehow selfless than self-serving. And if we try to self-enrich ourselves rather than serving our own people, and if we don't carve the practices we are now having in a political economy in each and every country, I don't think we can have a change very quickly. So we should stop now giving lip services and really look into ourselves first at the top leadership, whether we are up to the challenge and the existential threat we see now. So that's why leadership and political will, not only will, but action is necessary. Because most leaders, they promise. Obviously, when election comes, everybody promises, but there is no action. We are talking about action, implementation. So I see that there is a need now to transform ourselves in terms of our mindset change. That mindset begins with looking that Africa is not inferior. I mean, we are the ones who invented technologies. We were the ones who invented medicine. We were the ones who invented astronomy. We were the ones who invented technology, engineering. The precision you see now in Egypt, the pyramids, now with the modern technology and precision, you see that none other than Africans did that. So I think now we have to come back to our renaissance. This is our time for African renaissance. And that's important. And that's why the school is needed. We need to advocate this, and everybody has to understand. And as many of us said, we should stop this aid dependence. I mean, we should boldly say this. We shouldn't be afraid of that. We should say we have enough resources. We always talk about our potentials, but we should say that some challenges might happen when we stop the aid, but we should take that brand onto us and sacrifice ourselves for some time for the better, greater good for the future. And we have to do that, boldly decide that we have to stand by our own foot. This is a time. This is a time. If you miss that, I think thanks to President Trump, he has shown us this. We have to say, everybody has said, Africa first. We have to say Africa first boldly. And we should negotiate properly. I mean, we cannot isolate ourselves from the global community, but we have to negotiate in a proper way. And everybody is fighting for our critical minerals. Why we see the conflict in DRC is not resolved? Simply because there are many cooks there and we have to stop them. And this resource has to be utilized for Africans and value added, not because they prescribed it. I'm worried because the Lobito corridor, how it came, I know. And they are trying to tell us that these critical minerals has to be processed in Africa. I don't believe that is initiated by us. It is initiated by somebody else. We have to initiate our own programs ourselves. And this is a time to boldly say that we have to stand on our own foot and take risk and action at this moment. And that's why we need to build our capacity, and the school is much more important in this regard.
Time now for a short break. We'll be right back with more. Welcome back to State of Africa. Did you know that despite recent challenges, some African countries have made strides in reducing poverty levels by nearly 30% since 2015? Nonetheless, we still face significant hurdles in achieving the Sustainable Development Goals by 2030. Here's the rest of that conversation with different heads of state, moderated by Dr. Julie Gichuru.
The world has shown us clearly where it stands and how it stands, and Africa must recognize and say Africa first, is what we're hearing. I want to before I come back to you, please, Mr. Chipeta, I want to come back to your Excellencies Koroma and Marzuki for your focal areas. So if I asked you for your top 3 areas that Africa must focus on, from where you sit, What are those 3 things?
It reminds me of the time I assumed the presidency. I took over just 5 years after the war. And every aspect in the country needed attention. But then we sat down with my advisors and we zeroed in on just 5, we call it the agenda for change, on just 5 areas of intervention. For the purposes of Africa moving forward, I will look at the area of the human capital development. I mean, human capital development will include education, health, and social services. I will also look at agriculture, intervention in agriculture, because that is where you have a majority of our people. And it will require us addressing the issue of improving agriculture, taking advantage of the AI activities in agriculture and also agricultural processing. And the third area for me will be good governance, where you have the issues of the leadership. Because in all of this, if you don't have a committed and determined leadership to drive the processes, all the efforts will be futile. And in the good governance, we have to ensure that we have a civil society that will ensure that there is accountability and transparency in the management of government resources, the management of our natural assets, and also ensuring that the distribution of the goods and services are evenly done, and the guy in the remote village is provided for, as not just limiting the provision to the urban dwellers. So I think these will be my own take.
Thank you so much.
Well, I am deeply convinced that the awful situation described by Mr. Alpha Shipfield, this awful situation of Africa is mainly, I'm not saying that totally, but it's mainly due to the fact that Africa, unfortunately, has a lot of corrupt dictatorship supported by the West. This is my deep conviction. This is why I do not believe that we are going to tackle any real solution without tackling the real problem, which is we badly need everywhere democratic government, non-corrupt government, independent government. Otherwise, all technical measures that we are hearing about, I wouldn't say that they will be useless, but probably not that effect that we are, that we need and we deserve. So the main problem, once again, for the new generation of leaders is to set up democratic, non-corrupt, independent government. This is the first and the last condition. This is my deep conviction as a politician, as a human rights activist, and as an African also. It's not a matter of technical, it's not a matter of only economy. It's mainly matter of political will, political independence. This is the first and the last condition. This is my deep conviction.
Wow. I'm coming to the floor for questions, but first, a very easy question for you, sir. How do we go about raising finance for our development agenda? That's not to say we don't work with partners. It's not to say we don't work alongside others. But how do we create some independence for our own development? Where do we start?
My belief is that a lot of investment in Africa is actually misspent because it is doing things of a grandiose nature which are not touching the real problems of the ordinary folk who operate at a scale below the level at which projects are conceived. We have for years, and I worked in FAO, I know this, been seeking external help to build up capacity of Africa for ocean fisheries. African fisher people are still working with canoes because they are below the level at which the government has been thinking. The money is captured by the big people, or it is even given to subsidize the foreign fleets which are robbing Africa. The amount of incentives in the forestry sector for exploiting the Congo forest and the West African forest is incredible. They have policy support of government encouraging large firms, tax incentives, all the things that you say, let us attract investment by offering a tax holiday, by offering this, by offering this. All those are offered, but they're being offered to people who come to exploit without value addition. With regards to raising capital, two things come to mind. Firstly, we undervalue local currencies. The money that could go to supporting business in my country, a lot of it is siphoned off by changing money from other currencies and ending with the money in the banks, not ending up in investment into production or into trade. It is service money because we have undervalued our own currencies. Our obsession with foreign currency is holding us back from seeing that local investment in local currencies can take us quite a long way. Secondly, I think the money being raised for government is not necessarily helpful to development. Governments should get money, but the decision makers on investment are small people, and we have not organized them to the degree where they can attract investment. Right. They are too small scale. Each individual, each smallholder farmer is not trustworthy enough to loan money to. So government investment in formation of groups that can manage money will help us quite a lot to make money use better. We need better use before we can get more.
That's fantastic. And part of it is recognizing this development agenda is not about people in these rooms or policy actors. It actually flows right across our countries. At different levels, in all our communities, people are enabling the development goals. Think about a young person who's passionate about education and is raising money for others to go to school. Think about young people educating people within their community on well-being. Africans are doing it everywhere, everywhere. Think of the midwives who are unpaid, who are serving their community. That is development. And the minute Africa starts to see all her citizens as contributors to development, we change our mindset. I'm coming to the floor for questions.
Isn't it time that African leadership should begin thinking about interventions like why is Africa the biggest bank of disease? Yet Africa is the most inefficient as a manufacturer drugs that can treat this bank of disease. Secondly, whenever you go, you hear Africans are malnourished, very malnourished children. Yet Africa has the best environment for food production. So innovative thinking I brought it to our situation. It is now time for innovative leadership in Africa to look at our real situation. And our real situation is we are being managed by foreign interest. And I think it is time we manage ourselves. It is not going to be easy, but we must start it. We must manufacture drugs here. We have herbal medicines in Africa. If you take a herbal or medicine from Africa, they say you are a witch. When you go to the Chinese, they take their herbal medicine. That's fantastic. Have we gone a distance to see whether our traditional herbal medicine, trees, leaves, etc., can be of importance to Africa in developing things like active pharmaceutical ingredients that we can even sell to the others? I used to go to China and I would see these herbal medicine of theirs they use for malaria. And all of us laughed at them at that time. But today, artemisinin is the drug of choice for chloroquine. For malaria here. What has happened to our resources in regard to such a situation?
Bring it to the panel in a moment. Just to say, sir, that in Kenya, in the Meru region of Kenya, Wellcome Trust is doing work on the Meru plants as being the answer to the world's antimicrobial resistance crisis that is developing, and quietly doing work with the herbs there and the plants. So, yes.
My name is Sam Kutesa. I had the privilege and honor of being president of the United Nations General Assembly when the SDGs in 2014 and 2015 were formulated, discussed, and adopted. So I'm happy to see you all, because you were there all, and you were the ones who adopted them. And when you did so, we were all excited and elated because the goals are noble, and they were replacing the MDGs, which had been our agenda for the last 15 years, for the previous 15 years. But having formulated these goals, the 17 goals, we said there's something else that had not been done for the MDGs that we need to do for the SDGs. And that was means of implementation. Where is the money to do this? That's why with Secretary General Ban Ki-moon and I, and hosted by the Prime Minister of Ethiopia, you again sat in Addis Ababa and you approved the Addis Ababa Plan of Action, which was to means of financing, and that was the third international conference after the Monterey meeting. What has gone wrong is not the goals. What has failed are the means of implementation and the money to do so. In Addis Ababa, we said we shall use the Bretton Woods institutions to give us money. We shall have ODA to give us money. We shall work with the private sector to give us money. We shall work with philanthropists to give us money. The sources of money are what have dried up for us to implement. The goals have not ceased being noble. The goals are still noble. ODA is gone. And people, and I'm glad all the speakers here were talking about it, let's not base our hopes on ODA. Let us restructure the goals, maybe reduce them, and therefore the only thing that remains in our hands is domestic revenues, which we can rely on, and probably the private sector. Our idea of the private sector then, being able to be brought, for us to bring it in, was that each of these goals is actually a business opportunity. Education is a business opportunity. Health is a business opportunity. Agriculture is a business opportunity. How do we bring in the private sector? We said what we need to do to bring in the private sector is to de-risk investment in those areas by government policy to de-risk investment there. That's something we need to focus on. We can only depend on our own revenues, leverage our own local resources, minerals, beneficiation, add value, and then we can have money to finance our own agenda. Let us not think others will help us. I thank you.
My question is, how best can we bring this down to the layman, like the involvement and inclusiveness? Because most of these issues affect mostly the layman, but most of these people are even ignorant about these issues. They do not know that appreciating and using these foreign currencies is affecting them. So how best can we bring it down and sensitize them so that they get to know and also take action? Because I believe it all starts from down there, then to the government, but most of the times, these people believe that these are issues for the government, so they leave it all to like the officials to handle it. Thank you very much.
How do we transform the refugee population within the African continent to an economic strength for our countries? We have, I think, 40 million forcibly displaced people in Africa, 120 more million in the whole world. But what we see in countries, especially in the hosting countries, is that we're always looking for foreign support to get refugees to go outside the countries. And we know that refugees have skills, have all these valuable experiences they can contribute. But we find ourselves trapped in a situation where refugees for 30 years and many years are trapped in camps and all this potential is not used. What do we need to do to rethink how refugees are included nationally for an economic standpoint, but also socially, because the economic viability of this group is enormous. In Kenya, we have a plan that has started called Shirika Plan, but I think it's a question of Africa itself. How does Africa transform itself to be leading refugee responses vis-a-vis depending on others to actually create solutions for fellow Africans? Thank you.
My name is Takuzonasha Vurire. I'm a young Zimbabwean who came here with uongozi, and I've had a deep interest in business and government since I was a child, so I'm studying towards mineral economics currently. And a question that I had is, we see a pattern in very powerful countries, which you're stating have those 30-30 stakes. You look at China and how they've managed to create a strong nationalism in their youth. And I've met many Chinese youth, and they have, a Chinese youth, my own age, marketed a car called the Red Flag to me, but in plain sight. And the same thing that's happening in America, a move of nationalism. Young people are speaking about MAGA, Make America Great Again. You look at British youth engaging in debates on national policy. So the leaders and the excellencies were stating how we can use and tap into education to develop our people. So is there a way we can systematically use education?
The last one is around education and mindset change, was what I understood. And can I just say, nationalism can be a very important thing in certain ways. Nationalism can also be very problematic. And if it's informed by prejudice, it can be very dangerous. The young lady asking about how do we communicate to people, you know, the issues you've talked about, currency and the importance of valuing our own currency. How do we ensure that our ordinary citizenry understand these things? The second question was around refugees, and we have these 40 million displaced persons on the continent. How do we turn them into a contributor for economic participation and growth, rather than the way we've seen them for so long, which was as a humanitarian, you know, development situation. And then the final one, I think, was around this mindset issue. You've got these young Chinese doing incredible, innovative things. They believe in themselves and deliver for the continent. A final word from you, and then we'll wrap up. Thank you.
The question of transforming refugees into an economic resource for their own benefit and for the benefit of their host societies. I like to think that more or less all of us Africans are refugees, actually. When I was based in Uganda, as I was about to leave, I took a trip to, I think they call it Ajumani, right up in the northwest corner near South Sudan, with my team. We were talking with the local people, And I realized that there was no translation, but I was able to understand what they were saying. So clearly, either they came from Malawi or I came from there. In the not too distant past, you are talking about the Boers coming to South Africa. The Zulus themselves had just moved in maybe a few years before. In the country where I am, my father is a Sukuma from Tanzania, married to a Malawian from the lakeside. Later on, married my mother, whose people came from Swaziland. So for me, to say that these are refugees and should not have rights is a difficulty. I think we need a mindset change on the politicians who like to preach hate or distrust for refugees. Some of the most entrepreneurial people in Malawi now are Burundis and the Rwandans. Some of the most high-profile, good small business people in South Africa are Ethiopians, Bangladeshis, Burundians. So they're a resource if they're given a chance. And this business of us and them gets thrown away. That I would leave to the politicians.
Thank you all so much. Thank you. And thank you, sir, for a wonderful session.
The clock is ticking on our Sustainable Development Goals timer. But together, we can transform challenges into opportunities and pave the way towards a sustainable future for all. That was a very powerful conversation led by Julie Gichuru at the recently concluded Africa Leadership Forum. My name is George Ndirango. Be sure to stay in touch and give us your feedback on the Africa Leadership and Dialogue Institute's social media pages. See you next time.